Okay, so the next film we're going to review is Claire Denis' High Life. And Jim, tell us a little bit about that film.
So, High Life. So, directed by Claire Denis, as you just said, and it's her first English language film. And it is a sci-fi. I think you could make a case for it having maybe elements of horror in there as well in some regards. But it's definitely mainly a sci-fi, and a lot of its reference points are sci-fi. And basically, the film opens on Robert Pattinson aboard a spacecraft, basically. And it's just him and a young child. And what proceeds to happen is we kind of jump back and forth in time, and we find out that he was part of a crew of basically death row prisoners who have been sent on an experimental mission to see if they can harvest energy from black holes. So we cut back and forth, we see what happens to the other members of the crew, we see his current situation, if we call that time period the present, if you like. And then we also see flashes forward past that to the future, and we see all their interactions, what happened to the various other crewmates, and what activities they engaged in while they were there. And I'm sure we're going to have plenty of discussion about that in a minute. So it's a very conceptual film. I don't think it's necessarily got. There is definitely a narrative there, but that's really just a very scant framework for it to hang quite a lot of ideas on, or depending on your viewpoint, no ideas at all. We'll get to that. But that's basically the crux of it, and for most of it we are with Robert Pattinson. There's also, I would say, the most prominent character beyond that is Juliette Binoche as a doctor called Dibbs, who is also one of the prisoners, but she just happens to be slightly more scientifically qualified than the rest of them, and her attempts to create a baby on board, effectively, and that's kind of her main focus. And we see them going about their business and all the rest of it. And I'll let somebody else say what they got out of it, because I think this is one of these films where people are going to say various different things that they got out of it, or did not, as the case may be.
I effing love this film. I thought it was, of recent memory, one of the most startling sci-fi films I've seen in a while. As a Tarkovsky fan, that there's so much copy and pasted into this, but in a good way. And everything from the different formats they were using, everything from digital to 16mm for the flashback sequences, and even the weird CCTV stuff that they use in certain bits where they're training on board and stuff like that. And the ideas, as per any great sci-fi, whether it's what does it mean to actually harvest new beings in space, what does it mean to actually send people off and then not care about them anymore, basically prisoners in space, and then the sort of cliched idea, I'll admit, of as you approach a black hole, it's really you're approaching the black hole of your own self.
I don't love sci-fi films. They're not some of my favorite, but I love Claire Denis, and I love this film. I think almost even like we were talking about with Beats, it created this atmosphere in a completely different way, where I was completely immersed in it, and I was completely wondering what was going to happen next with this group of people we were following along with a spaceship, and what was up with the dogs and the other spaceship and things like that. So many questions going on, but if you can consistently stay in that and not be pulled out, this is unrealistic. It shows it's a phenomenal film, but the soundtrack and the beauty of the film and the acting, Robert Pattinson, and I'm a huge fan of Juliette Binoche. It blew me away too.
I think as well, it's I really think there's some really original imagery as well, that I did not expect to see in any film, regarding Mia Goth, and basically there's an amazing shot of the astronauts almost dancing weightlessly as they're dropped off at the beginning. It's yeah. Annie.
So the part I liked about the film was the relationship between the father and the daughter, because it kind of it's an interesting premise. So this kid who's born in space has never been to Earth, but is born of Earthlings, and has been brought up by archive footage of Earth, I think, on like how she sees the world, or the non-world, so the space around her. That I would have liked to kind of see that a bit more, but then there's a lot of other stuff. And then, like Amanda said, that you require kind of that immersion into the story, which I just never got. I think the main instigator is Robert Pattinson, whose face I just can't stand. So it distances me already from the film. Any film he's in, I just don't know. I just don't like. And then the second part of it is just the premise is really odd. So I know it's stupid to cling on to things, but just like, if these people are death row inmates, who's left in the Earth? Because like they're definitely not death row inmates, and the only reason they are made to be death row inmates is so they will have a reason to go on an eternity flight to a black hole, because otherwise nobody else would go on that ride. Like if you're a normal prisoner because of something you've done, you would just like rather sit at Earth and just like sit through your your prison stint. But like it's just a weird premise. And then there's a lot of things. So I looked up online to see if I was the only one who didn't like it. And looks like 57% didn't. So I have a bit of confidence in saying this. And one of the best ones I saw online was someone saying it's a collection of things you wish you could unsee. And there's plenty of that. So and it's just a bit weird. There's a lot of like sex stuff. There's a lot of rape, and I'm not sure if I like the way they are handling rape. So there's a violent rape scene. Again, spoilers. I'm always the one giving spoilers. There's a violent rape scene, and then there's like a female rape scene that is handled very differently, and that kind of woke me up a bit. Like, is this how we should be handling an issue like this? But again, I'm being a bit too picky on things. I just couldn't get that immersion, and I thought it was a bit silly, but not even silly, just a bit messy and weird, and intentionally trying to be a bit too smart.
So, on the spoilers thing, I think when the spoilers include a giant dildo, I think it's perfectly okay to flag that up in advance. I think that's the sort of thing that somebody should probably know about before they go into this film.
Yeah, don't bring your kids into this either.
Yeah, or older relatives, or, just be aware. Be aware. What I will say is part of what I liked about the film, and it's interesting that, Luca, you saying original imagery, because I do agree with that. But one of the things I was wanting to talk about is Amanda saying that you don't really maybe gel with sci-fi a lot. And I think maybe one of the differences is this, and I think what's original about it is it does make use of some quite well-established sci-fi imagery. Like it's got a very Solaris feel to it as they're walking around the ship. It's got... I got a very strong silent running vibe off it, because there's kind of the central garden that they tend to, and it's kind of this oasis of green in the middle of this ship, and it very clearly evoked that for me. But then there's just all these other different bits in terms of kind of like, strong kind of monochrome lighting and all the rest of it, which kind of evokes sci-fi films we know about, right? And even when you get to the part where they are at the black hole, I mean, even recent films such as Interstellar, it kind of recalls that. But it's doing something very different, right? Because a lot of sci-fi films go the whole, what does it mean to be human route, right? Like good ones do it, terrible ones do it, like some do it in block, but like Prometheus tried to do that pretty terribly in my opinion, but it did try to do it. But it is a little bit what Luca said of, as you're approaching the black hole, it's kind of like literal and metaphorical. And the reason she seems to jump back and forth is it seems to be not really asking what is it to be human. It's kind of like, what is it to be human when there is nothing else, right? What kind of behaviors do people regress to? How do they interact? What is it that's driving them, and all the rest of it? And it's using kind of the language of sci-fi to say that, but it's got a completely different, the analogy is it's got a completely different speech pattern to a lot of other, particularly recent sci-fi. So in that regard, I find it really, really quite interesting there. And it's funny that Annie mentioned the archive footage that the daughters brought up on, because it was kind of an unexpected appearance for Scotland and Murrayfield in that segment. I know, which I was not expecting when I watched it. I wasn't expecting Flower of Scotland. Yeah, I wasn't expecting Flower of Scotland to pop up in the middle of this film, to be honest. But it does. So there you go, Edinburgh. Go see it for that reason.
I think as well. At least since we're talking about this after Beats. I think, Amanda, I think you're right. I think like atmosphere is a big part of all the films we're talking about today. But I think it's a great case of a sci-fi that's trying to do something new by sort of what you're saying, which is like taking tropes that currently exist, but in just imbuing it with characters that are so rich in texture. Like, this idea that Jules Binoche is like, trying to create a baby in space after she's done something to her own family that has caused her to be on this prison ship. And, there's a dog sequence which directly pertains to Robert Pattinson's backstory. And yeah, as per the black hole thing, it's like, it's a film that is cerebral, but it's like, okay, it's like, if there's only humans left, kind of have to talk about them. We can't go into, even though like they did consult people to create the imagery of the black hole, it's like, we're not going to be going into 2001 level scientific detail of like, what are we actually doing here? It's like, no, we're talking about a father and a daughter in space.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's certainly really, for me and Luca and Jim, a bit of something to check out. For Annie and many 57% supposedly, it's not.